dark recaps here. In this video, I have 2 short but true scary stories which will give you the chills. Before we continue, please hit that like button. Consider subscribing because there are new videos coming out every week. Don't miss out. Story number 1. The Hospital Morgue. The morgue at Karedzi General Hospital in Zimbabwe has seen its share of victims over the past few decades. There have been murder victims, suicides, accidents, and those who have perished at the hands of Mother Nature. In April of 2007, a nurse by the name of Irina was working the late-night shift in the hospital when her supervisor approached her and asked her to deliver some paperwork to an office in another part of the hospital. When Irina reached the office door, she remembered feeling so sleepy that she didn't know if she could hold her eyes open much longer. Opening the door slowly, she was confused about what she saw inside. The lights were off, but she saw people walking about the room. Many of them had their hands clasped together and were praying in loud voices, begging to the sky. Others just walked around the room. Irina didn't want to disturb the strange meeting, so she decided not to turn on the lights. After watching for a few minutes, she could make no sense of the matter and closed the door, going back out into the hallway. "What were you doing in there?" a voice asked, startling Irina. Irina turned to see a doctor and nurse standing behind her. "I was just delivering some paperwork," Irina replied. "To the morgue?" the nurse asked. Stepping back, Irina observed the sign above the door she had just come from. In her sleepy state, she had not realized she had been standing in the hospital morgue. Fear began to fill her very soul as she walked quickly down the hallway. What had she seen? Story number 2. This doesn't belong to you. In the year 1893, Jackson, Tennessee, there stood an old house on Madison Street. For years it had been vacant and was known by local citizens to be quite haunted. Several grown men had recently been frightened when they saw a woman in a shining white robe through one of the windows during the night. It was said the figure passed along the floor just as if it were floating and settled down on an old piano bench and started playing a tune. This event would happen nightly as neighbors watched from a distance. The owner of the home hired 6 strong men from the neighborhood to move out all the furniture for renovations. Everything was moved out accordingly, except a large, ancient piano. The men struggled to move the piano to the door, and no matter how hard they tried to lift it or push, it would not go out the door. The doorway was certainly wide enough for the piano to fit, but some unseen force just would not let it pass. When the men decided to step away from the piano and take a break, something startling happened. The piano moved on its own, back to the original location. It was moved 3 more times, and each time, it moved back again. One of the neighbors came over to see what the trouble was all about and told them about the woman in the white robe that played the piano at night. "It belongs to her," the man said. "She can have it," agreed all of the men, jumping into the moving truck and leaving it behind. The men never returned to the home and considered the job finished. A few years later, in 1893, another strange occurrence took place in the Arctic during the expedition of Lieutenant Peary. It was said the men were searching for skeletons from a group called the Arctic Highlanders. The skeletons of this tribe were very rare, and the group had promised to bring back 6 of them to the Chicago World's Fair in exchange for more grant money for future expeditions. The expedition crew tried to deal with the Eskimos and buy some of the skeletons, but they were very superstitious people and said the skeletons were not to leave the island. Their efforts were fruitless, so they resulted in grave robbery and loaded 13 of the Arctic Highlander skeletons onto their boat and set sail. As the men stood on the deck at night and admired the beautiful colors of the northern lights, one of the men spotted an Eskimo boat rowing alongside them. They thought this impossible as they were 50 miles from shore, and there was no way they could travel that far so quickly in one of their small boats. The men called out to the Eskimos, urging them to turn back and not to come aboard their vessel. Suddenly, the boat disappeared and could not be seen on either side. Hair stood upon the crew members' arms as they heard a terrible and mournful wail coming from the inside of the boat. Suddenly 6 Eskimos came from the hatch and walked silently across the deck. Their dark, lifeless eyes fixed upon each of the frozen crew members, as they seemed to float by them slowly. When they reached the end of the boat, they all disappeared, leaving no trace of ever being present. When the expedition arrived back home, they opened the 13 bags, which contained the Eskimo skeletons, and were shocked to see that 6 of the skulls had disappeared. The bags containing the skulls had been sealed and undisturbed prior to opening them. It seemed that 6 ghosts decided to take back what was theirs. None of the crew could ever explain the spooky incident. Thanks for sticking around if you made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed your time here. If you did, please consider leaving a like on this video. It really helps my channel out. If you're hungry for more content like this, subscribe to me. Dark Recaps. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.